Today's episode of Gold Star Stories is a powerful and deeply personal one. I'm speaking with Georgia, wife of Staff Sergeant Edvin Franco. Edvin was a tank mechanic in the U.S. Army, a man known for his pride in his work and his ability to keep spirits high. To his teammates, he was the one who made long days bearable with laughter. To Georgia, he was the perfect match in personality, humor, and love. To his infant son, he was a devoted father, protective, gentle, and completely present, even in the sleepless nights of early parenthood. Edvin's life was cut tragically short in March 2025 when the recovery vehicle he operated sank into a peat bog in Lithuania during a mission that should never have unfolded the way it did. What followed was days of agonizing uncertainty, an international recovery effort, and the devastating confirmation that Edvin and his teammates were gone. This is a story about more than loss. It's about a soldier's pride, a husband's laughter, a father's devotion, and a wife's resilience. Georgia brings Edvin to life through her words, his humor, his courage, his refusal to be anything other than himself. And she reminds us that every fallen service member leaves behind far more than a name on a list.
Marine Captain Brian Latendry died earlier this month in an explosion in Iraq. He was 27, a husband and father, and he was buried in Arlington National Cemetery, a few miles from where he grew up. As America observes Memorial Day,
I have been directed by the President of the United States and the Commandant of the Marine Corps to inform you that today, 0530, your son was killed in action while in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Not very many of us can accomplish our goals or our dreams, and he always knew where he wanted to go, and he did it.
A Gold Star family is one who has lost a loved one serving in the United States military. It's a distinction no family ever seeks, a bond shared through sacrifice, remembrance, and profound loss. I'm Nick Latendry, and I've been a Gold Star sibling for over 18 years. In those 18 years, I've learned that while ceremonies fade, medals are stored away, and life continues, the story doesn't end for the families left behind. This podcast is dedicated to remembering those who gave everything for their country and to telling the lesser-known stories, the quiet, powerful journeys of grief, strength, resilience, and hope that follows after the flags are folded and the crowds disperse. These are Gold Star Stories. Well, go ahead and start telling me a bit about Edvin.
Yeah, so Edvin was a very big nerd, and I'm not nerdy in the slightest, but our personalities were like an exact match. Like, he and I were like, if he was a girl, he would have been me, and if I was a guy, I really would have been him, personality-wise. He was very funny. He was very shy at first, very reserved, but he was very funny once you got to know him. Like, I can't tell you how many messages I had gotten from people that I've never met on his team after he had passed, being like, he was hilarious. Like, he kept everybody laughing. He was always in a good mood. He was really just this spark of like my life and a lot of people's lives. And we have a son together. He'll be a year old in October, and he loved being a dad. Like, he would get up with him in the middle of the night. He would take him, when I wanted to rest in the day. If people wanted to hold him, you would think I would be the protective one. He would be like, nope, you can't hold him, sorry. He was just this, full of life, he was just not scared to just be who he was. Like, I'd always be like, are you sure? And he'd be like, I don't care. Like, let them think whatever they're going to think. I don't care. And that's what I really loved about him, was that he truly just lived life how he wanted, and he never really cared what other people thought.
So, how long was he in the military?
I think this would have been his seventh year, yeah. Either 7th or 8th. I'm pretty sure it was his 7th.
Okay.
And at the end of his contract, he would have been at 10 years, which would have been like 2028. I'm not good at math, so it's either 6 or 7.
I'm not good at
Yeah.
math either. So, how did you two meet?
We met on Bumble.
Okay,
We did. We met on Bumble.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Whereabout was he stationed before going over to Lithuania? Like, where were you guys living?
We were at Fort Stewart, which is right outside of Savannah in like a little town, Hinesville, Georgia. It's been in the news quite recently, a lot actually. But yeah, this is where he spent his entirety of the military at. He hadn't been anywhere else.
And what was his job in the Army?
He was a tank mechanic.
Okay. That's a pretty cool one. So tell me a little bit about him getting deployed over to Lithuania. That's an interesting one to me, not one that was
Yeah.
even like part of my, you know, idea of places that we've been sending people.
I honestly like when we had met, um, we met in 2023. So we weren't together super duper long. But we had met in 2023 and they had an idea that they were going on this like Europe rotation, whatever, but they didn't know exactly where. And I was like, okay, like that's fine, like whatever, we'll get there when we get there. And then I got pregnant and it was a little bit more of like, maybe this is a little scary. But we had, I feel like it's like typical, it sounds typical military, but we got married, had a baby, bought a house, did everything. Um, and then I want to say like halfway through my pregnancy last year, it was in the air if they were either going to Poland or Lithuania, and his specific unit was designated to go to Lithuania. So they left at the beginning of the year. And so he was not over there that long before the accident happened. But yeah, so I didn't really know where Lithuania was, to be honest. I was like on Google Maps, like, where are you going?
That makes sense. That's how I'd be too. So, and that's one of those places too. You probably think, oh, Lithuania, there's nothing really going on there, not too much to worry about. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that wasn't even in your mindset. So can you take me back a little bit and tell me about how you found out?
Yeah. So my husband's job was a tank mechanic, but he had went to school and he was able to operate and kind of be on an 88. And so probably within the last year or so, he really was mainly on his 88 and he really loved it. Like he took a lot of pride in his vehicle and what he did, and they were known as kind of like the best 88 in the brigade. Like if you needed an 88, like they were going to call like him and his team to go and help. Um so March 24th for us cuz there was like a time difference. And I had talked to him earlier in the day and he had went to sleep, like it was like later, whatever. Um, and he had randomly texted me and it was like 5 o'clock our time, so it was, early morning for them. And he had replied to a message, and I was kind of like, what are you doing? Like, why are you awake? He was like, oh, we're going to go on this recovery mission. And I was like, oh, okay, like, whatever. I didn't think anything of it. He does it all the time. And so I went and I got dinner with friends. I came home and I hadn't heard from him in a couple hours, but I was like, maybe they don't have service, maybe that he's just really busy. Like, I really tried not to freak myself out, even though I was. Um, so I went to bed, kind of woke up the next morning, and before we knew that, like, I didn't know when there was like a accident or someone missing that they black out communication, but somebody had slipped out of that blackout and told me and a friend of mine whose husband was also in the vehicle, hey, like, your husbands are missing. And we were like, what are you talking about? Like, we kind of freaked out, like, what are you talking about? So we got together and, we were trying to figure out like what was going on, what was happening, and it was probably like 5 p.m. So it was kind of rolling up on that 24-hour mark. And, I looked at her and I was like, if they can't find them, something's wrong. And we were both kind of like, yeah. So we split up, we went our separate ways. And then around 11 p.m. our time is when they came to our doors and kind of notified us that they were um, unknown, because at this point they didn't know where they were. And so I remember, like, my son was 5 months old, and I was holding him, and it was late at night, and, after they left, I called my family, and I was like, "Hey, like, y'all need to get here tomorrow morning because they can't find them." And that was kind of our first, sort of like, okay, like, they're really for real missing, and they don't know where they are.
So how much information do they give you when they tell you that they're missing? They're missing, not anything necessarily about the mission or anything. It's just they're missing. Hang tight.
So, it's kind of like, when you I tell people, I'm like, most people, you just get one knock at the door, and usually that's like the notification. But we got two, and the first one, they can't give you a lot of information. I just remember them being like, "Are you his wife?" And I was like, "Yes." And they're like, "The status of your soldier's unknown. Tomorrow morning, your casualty officer will come, the casualty response team, and a chaplain will all meet you in the morning and kind of give you more details about what's going on." And I was like, "Okay." And I was like, "So you can't tell me anything?" And they're like, "No, ma'am, like we can't. Like we can just tell you kind of that they're unknown." But I just kinda was like, "What?
That seems absolutely horrific.
What are you talking about?" Like, they just vanished. And, nobody at this point, nobody could really wrap their minds around it. But, while it was nighttime here, it was, like 6, 7 o'clock in the morning over there. So they were overnight, they got more answers for us. And so when we woke up the next morning, we had more answers. And that's when it went really public on social media that they were missing. I wanna say it said missing. Somebody at NATO released that they were dead, and they didn't even know where they were. So NATO had to even, like, retract their statement because that came out literally, like, March 26th. Um, so it was kind of, our family started kinda rolling in, and they were like, "What's going on? What's going on?" And we were like, I don't know. We don't know."
That's that's wild to me. So your first knock at the door is basically just being like, "Hey, we don't know what's happening. Hang tight." And
Yeah.
then so your next one, you kinda had a heads up, obviously. Were you expecting that news to come with the next one? Or were you hoping for, I mean, obviously you're hoping for something different, but what is your thought process there? Because I mean, that had to be a hell of a night.
It was kinda I just remember that night, I talking to my family, and they're like, we're coming first thing in the morning, like, you know, I promise, we'll be there tomorrow." And, my son's so little, so he's still he's still waking up even now, and he's almost 11 months old. But he was really waking up back then. And so I was like, just telling myself, "You've got to go to sleep. You've got to get some rest. You can't function without, sleeping." So I remember I finally had fallen asleep, and then by somehow it was the next morning, and at that point, before my family had gotten there, I had friends coming over. I had, just a swarm of people just at my door. Whatever we needed, they really were there for us. And then that next morning, we kind of got the information that they had found the 88, but it was in a bog, and it was under I believe it was either 15 or 16 feet of mud at this point. Um, so we had kind of found that out the next day that they had found the vehicle, but it was, trapped. And so at this point, they didn't know if they were in the vehicle, if they got out of the vehicle, or what, but they had to assume that they were all inside. So that's kinda how the next day played out, is, like, once everybody's family was there, we had kinda gotten word that they found the 88.
So, how long after they found it did were they able to give you news? Was there another knock on the door with the casualty assistance officer at that point?
So, they went missing on the 25th of March. They didn't pull the vehicle out and find them until March 31st. Um, it was a whole, like, almost week-long recovery. They had Lithuania, they had Poland, I wanna say they had Germany forces. They had to fly, the Navy CB divers out there. I think they flew some other soldiers from America out there as well to assist with the operation. They had to get, like, special equipment because the 88 is like a 70-ton vehicle, and for it to kinda be, like, trapped under all that mud and water, it was really, like, a very tough job to get it out. Um and they had made progress, but then the ground was unstable, so it sunk even further. And so they kind of, they had a plan and then they had to go back on it. And then they would find another way and then they're like, no, we can't do that. So it was just kind of a lot of 24/7, working, doing the best they can to, like, get this mud and water out. They had the divers trying to go in there and, like, feel, but it was such a tough situation that it kind of took a little bit longer. But on the 30th, they had finally gotten the, um, I think it was like a line. I think there was like 2 lines they had to go connect to the vehicle to pull it out, and on the 30th, they finally got that second line pulled on late at night. And so I remember going to bed on the 30th, and I kinda had a gut feeling that the next morning that they would come and tell me, that they were gone, because at this point I didn't have any hope, we were exhausted. Like, it was such a mentally exhausting week, and I was at the point to where I just wanted my husband home. I was like, at this point, like, if he's down there and he's deceased, like, I want him home. I wanna, put him to rest and get my closure that I need, because it was like torture every single day because it was like, "Oh, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know." So, it was March 31st at, 7 a.m. is when my casualty officer and a chaplain came and knocked on our door, and they had told me that they had, found him and he was gone. And so at that point, it was it was devastating, obviously, but it kinda was like I could breathe a little because I was like, "At least they found them, and at least, we could kinda breathe a little." But it was unfortunate because there was 4 of them. They only found 3 in the vehicle, and so the next day, they found the 4th one. And so I remember we were kinda like me and my friend, we were relieved, but then when news broke out that they didn't find all of them, we were like, "Oh my god, like, how much more, like, can this go on?" But, like, luckily and thankfully, it was just the next day, um, that it took for them to find everybody and finally, give the families that sense of, "We found them," and I can't imagine, like, how exhausted, like, the people working on it were too, and how hard it probably was for them, but I mean, they didn't stop, like, they didn't rest, like, they really truly, like, it was around the clock, like, we were getting pictures at, like, it would have been, like, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning for them, of them out there constantly just, like, working, and, it was such a surreal feeling to feel like, oh, they truly care about getting them home to us and finding them. even if it was not in the way that I had ever imagined him coming home.
So was this more just like, do we know how it ended up there? Was it just a navigational error? They just kind of drove into it, or?
So, from what we've been told and kind of seen, because the families were able to go to Lithuania
Oh,
at the beginning of July. The president of Lithuania invited us to receive an award from the country. So we were able to actually go out there and kind of we saw the accident site. We got to ask questions, and the way that the peat bog looked, it really just looked like a puddle. Like, you would have never thought it was going to be what it was. And, people that I've talked to and, that was over there that did the same job as them were all like, we would have drove through it too. Because that vehicle can drive through puddles. Like, I have pictures of like them in the field working on these vehicles in like waist high water. So it was just not like, it wasn't a second thought to go through like a little puddle. But the area that they had ended up was supposed to have been kind of marked off. But I think it like really it wasn't marked off, like there was some miscommunication, but nobody really truly knew. Um, but if you look into the terrain and the history into Lithuania, because I did a lot of Googling and a lot of research through this whole week. It's not uncommon for these bogs to be out there. And so the people like I've talked to, like it really truly could have been anybody. Because I mean it looked like a puddle. Like it just kind of looked like you would have just and people over there were like we were able to just kind of walk over it. We could get on and walk it. But unfortunately, like, the weight and the size of that vehicle wasn't able to withstand it. So it really was just kind of like a freak thing that happened, and it's sometimes hard to wrap my head around to think like, these bogs do exist and that these things can happen and these vehicles can sink, and I just hope that people like can learn from it and can be a little bit more careful with their terrains. And another big issue we had is they were sent out there alone. They didn't have an escort vehicle, which is not supposed to happen. And when you go in these like convoys, you're supposed to always have a vehicle with you, but they didn't. It was just them. So that was another thing I feel like kind of stalled them on their search, is because they didn't have anybody with them. They didn't have anybody to report like, hey, we need help, like, and we need it right now. And I can't say that could have, I don't know if that would have ever changed the outcome of the situation, but I do believe that if they had somebody with them, that we wouldn't have had such a hard and horrible week long um kind of search and rescue happening.
wow. So can you tell me, once they got him back stateside, how did things go for you from there?
So when they flew them back stateside, before they flew them back, Lithuania held a procession in their capital. It was a very dignified, it was very beautiful. And that hadn't been done since like wartime over there. So they had honored them. And since they were overseas, they were flew to Dover. So we went and met them in Dover. And then at Dover, they dress them, they do all the things. And then they were kind of flown to their like wherever they went and all of that. Um and that I want to say it took About a week and a half for us to finally, like, get them to where we had put them, and then we were able to, have these funerals. And the hardest part was, my husband and his best friend, um, Jose, were on the vehicle together. And so me and his wife and, him and Jose, like, we were all very, very good friends. And so, I tell people all the time, I'm like, I didn't only lose my husband, I lost my friend in this. And I I went to his funeral. His funeral was first. And we had Edvin's funeral on Earth Day, of all days in April. um, and it was very beautiful. It was very respectful, but it really was a very difficult process of the waiting, getting them back from overseas and getting them home and getting them, resting. It took some time, but, thankfully, you know, we got it done and they were able to, be in a very respected and loving way laid to rest.
Wow. Let me think what else. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what story I was expecting from you, Georgia. I apologize for not realizing sooner that you were a Gold Star too when you originally reached out to me. I get, you try to grow this social media stuff. You just kind of go blind to a certain extent with how many people are like messaging you and following you.
Yeah.
So I'm very thankful that you reached back out and told me. And this is just a story I just have never heard anything like it before. So thank you for sharing it. In the aftermath, I mean, you're still so close to all of this. Obviously, this is not very long ago. Have you done anything to seek out help? Have you found community within the Gold Star community at all to help you process any of this?
Yeah, so yeah, it was very recent, but I feel like I some days I won't talk about the accident or whatever, but I do love to like share who he was. I love sharing, his story, and I feel like that keeps who he was alive. And that's the last thing that I can do for him is to keep him and his legacy alive. You know, Going through this with, like, one of my best friends has been I hate that we have to do it together, but, if I didn't have her, I don't know really kinda how this would have played out. And, I have reached out and I have, other Gold Star spouses that I talk to and that have talked to me, and there's a few here at Stewart that I still speak to, and it's just kind of it's a day by day. I feel like no matter where you are in grief, it's always there. Some days I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'm fine. I can handle this. And then other days I'm like, I don't know if I can handle this. But I have a little boy that's counting on me, and I have to, keep showing that, hey, daddy was such a good man. And, unfortunately, in the nature of the accident, is something you never like you said, like, you can picture, like, certain vehicle accidents happening, like, certain aviation accidents happening, because you've heard it, you've seen it, you've dealt with it. But with our nature of the accident, like, it truly, I feel like, hasn't happened since, like, wartime, like, way, way back in, like, World War One or World War Two, like, you know, and I've read stories of like, these vehicles going into bogs or people going into bogs, but to think about it happening in this, century, this time frame is a little mind-boggling. And still to us, it still sometimes doesn't make sense. And like I we went and saw 88s, and we've asked every single question you could probably ask people, like, and even people that, work on these vehicles are like, we can't even wrap our heads around it. And I really truly hope it never happens again. Um, and I pray that nobody ever has to deal with what we had to deal with. But just every day is so different, and just I think staying around like family and friends kind of keeps me in a good place, in a good headspace, and just no matter what, I have to keep living, even if it's some days it's the most difficult thing I have to do, but I have to keep pushing forward for him. And because I know in the back of my head, he would be like, "You girl, you have to keep going. Like, you have to." And I feel like I'm very strong in my like religious side, and I truly do believe like one day I'll be with him again. And I look at it more so as like each day isn't like further away from him. I'm like I'm getting closer. And I'm like that might sound morbid in a way, but in my
That's a beautiful
head
way of
I'm
looking
like
at it.
you never know, what could happen. And I know like one day I'll be with him again, and I may be like 90 years old. And but I told him, I told him before we buried him, I was like, "I'm coming for you." I was like, "You just gotta wait a little bit, but I'll be there one day." And until then, I just gotta raise our son and keep it moving. And because he would be so mad at me if I gave up on our son. Like, he would be so mad. He would be like, "I'm mad at you."
Did Edvin have any siblings or parents involved in any of this?
Yes. So his parents are together. And they're wonderful people. His whole family's wonderful, but his parents are wonderful and very, very involved with us and our little boy. And he had 3 siblings. He has uh an older sister who he's very, very, very close with. And I think his other sister and him are like a year or 2 apart. I can't remember right off the top of my head, but they're similar in age. And then he has a younger brother who's 14. And so, they obviously took it very difficult. And I've lost a parent. I've never lost a sibling. I can't relate on a sibling loss. But I can only imagine how difficult it is. And I try and stay very close to them. And, they're coming to spend the holidays with us. And I truly think like it heals them to have a piece of him still here. Um, and just staying close. And we went through this loss together. And no matter what, we are family. And so I try and, let them know like, "Hey, I'm here for you." Like, um, because I feel like sometimes in the aftermath, like the siblings, the parents, like if there's a wife, sometimes they get overlooked. And I can say at the beginning it was kind of hard, at first to get out of my own grief and realize that other people were grieving. But then, as time went on, I was kind of like, hey, like, let's check on people. Like, let's make sure that they're doing okay. And, as his wife, like knowing what he would have wanted me to do with his family. And I try and, keep them close and make sure that they're taken care of as well, because he was very close with his family, and they are pieces of Edvin too. Like they're pieces of him. And I am like that's the main links that will keep me kind of when I need reminders of like, oh, these little stories and tidbits of him, like that's who I can get it from. Um and I really do appreciate and love them a lot.
Georgia, thank you for your strength and for trusting us with Edvin's story. Through your words, we got to see him not just as a soldier, but as a husband who made you laugh and as a father who poured his heart into your little boy. It's stories like yours that remind us why we can never let these names fade into silence. And now, as we always do, we raise a glass to Staff Sergeant Edvin Franco. To Edvin, the tank mechanic who took immense pride in his craft, whose recovery vehicle was known across the brigade as the one you could always count on. To Edvin, the husband who was his wife's perfect match in humor and spirit, who could make her laugh at any moment. To Edvin, the father who stayed up through the night, held his son close, and protected him with a fierce love that never wavered. You lived life without fear of what others thought. You brought light and laughter into every space you entered, and you deserved more than what happened in that bog in Lithuania. We honor you not as a statistic, not as a headline, but as a man of joy, devotion, and love. We say your name. We carry your story. We will not let you be forgotten. Say their name, Staff Sergeant Edvin Franco. A special thank you to our Gold Star Story supporters Terry Mullins, Danielle Mettle, Jackie Mullins, June Latendry, Edie Howard, Bob and Pat Scott, Mary Jo Stoy, Helen Krupp, Georgia Franco, Jess Miller, and Aaron Peck. You can support our work at goldstarstoriesusa.com or buymeacoffee.com/goldstarstories. Every bit helps us keep the mic on for families like Georgia's. Until next time, look after your people.